Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel BethChatsBooks. Now I first and foremost want to apologise for the really crappy quality of this film. It's kind of cold today but really bright and sunny out, and so my usual spot here, the light's kind of coming in from this area and I can't really do much to change it. I've tried for 10 minutes to kind of edit where I'm sitting, but wherever I'm sitting in the room, whether the windows and the curtains are open or not, makes no difference. There seems to be just a bright light somewhere in the way of the film, so I'm just going to carry on with the video regardless. So today's video is going to be my October wrap-up. Now disappointingly, this was also meant to be my Canadian Appreciation Month, and I had a target of 12 books to read, which I definitely did not achieve. I've only managed to read 5 books, which is a little bit of a disappointment, but in my November TBR, which I'm going to bring out very shortly, I'm going to include the rest of the Canadian books, but I'm not going to call it a Canadian Appreciation Month. I'm just going to call it my November TBR and my November kind of book haul. And it will include the rest of those Canadian texts, but I'm not going to class it as a themed month. It's just going to be a normal November reading month. So you will get to see me read and review the rest of the books, but for now I'm just going to go into the 5 books that I did manage to read this month. So the first one of those was A Complicated Kindest by Miriam Towers. Now, I did a book review of this, so I'll link it down below. And I apologise again if I've butchered her name, because every time I say it, it doesn't sound right, but never mind. So I kind of did a lot more detail about what I felt about this book in that book review. But it was a very interesting book. I did not expect to be so taken with this book after reading it. It's about a main character who lives in Manitoba in a Mennonite community, and her mum and her sister get discommunicated and they have to leave, and then at the end she faces the kind of same situation. She goes through a crisis of identity. She lives with a father and they don't communicate in very conventional ways. So it's a coming of age but with a different twist. She's a very broken character is the best way to describe her, and so you get very connected to her all the way through. Her name's Nomi, I just remembered that, it's been a long month. And you get very invested in Nomi's story. It's very short, but it tells a lot within a short period. There's lots and lots of stuff to discuss here. This author had never been on my radar before, and I definitely want to pick up some more from her, some more works from her, because this was really interesting. I'd recommend this as a great kind of book club read, because there's a lot within this short book to dissect. Things about the Mennonite community, about this coming of age narrative, about the deeper struggles that she seems to have, discussions around religion and discussions about sexuality and other bits of stuff in here. So it's a really rich text, and I really enjoyed this. I think I gave this 5 stars, I believe, maybe 4 or 5 stars for this one. I really enjoyed it. So there's that one. And then the second one I read this month was Stephen Leacock's Sunshine Sketches of a Little Town. Now this one is kind of a collection of short stories, but all in the same location with the same kind of characters. So this is a community called, just let me find it, Mariposa, and it's meant to be a place in Canada, like a kind of everyday place. And he's talking about this small community, and they have a bar owner and they have a religious priest. They have people that work at the home store, and like they're all interweaving stories. I didn't love this, unfortunately. I think I gave this 3 stars. It was just a very mediocre read for me. Now I know this is very old and this is kind of a Canadian classic for some people, but the characters had no depth. The stories were a bit too light-hearted. So it's meant to be that people keep having incidents and people are caricatures within this, and it's meant to be very light-hearted. And I did register the humour. It wasn't difficult to get the humour within this piece, but it wasn't engaging enough. And I don't know whether it's because I come from a generation now that we get comedy, especially, is one of those genres that we're given in very different forms and we consume it in very different ways now. And so this light-hearted, simplistic way of dishing out comedy didn't have a profound enough effect on me. I didn't love it. I didn't detest it. I was very neutral on the whole reading experience of this, so that's why I only gave it 3 stars. I know a lot of people love it. If you kind of like that idea of a community interweaved with different stories and some light-hearted comedy, then I would give it a go, but it really was not my cup of tea. So there's that one. And then the next book I read in the month of October was Room by Emma Donoghue. Now this one was really, really interesting. I thought I was going to really dislike this book because it's written from the perspective of Jack, who's a 5-year-old boy, and so it's written very simplistically. And when you first start to read it, you think, I'm really not going to like this because it's consistently written in a children's voice, so the grammar is not perfect and it's written in the wrong tense at some points. But you then start to forget that bit of the book as a whole because you get absorbed in the plot. Now the plot I really enjoyed because it didn't just go through the whole experience of being in the room. So Jack and his mother is called Ma. Well, she's just called Ma in this. I think she's got another name later on, but I forget that, sorry. So it goes through their experience in room. Obviously Ma, the character of Ma, had been taken by a man and she'd lived in this room for a very long time. I think it's a shed outside of his house before she has Jack. We don't really know much about what happened before that period. We believe that there was another child she had that died during childbirth before Jack was born, so she had a lot of trauma before he was there. And so we have a period of time where they live in the room, but then it's nice because this story progresses outside of the room, so it progresses to when they become free and how they begin to assimilate back in the community. Now for Jack it's really interesting because he's never lived outside of the room before, so his development is a lot slower than a normal 5-year-old. His writing and language is superior to a 5-year-old because she teaches him these things, but she can't teach him what's real and what's not. And they have a television in the room, and his perception of reality and fantasy are very thin. He seems to think everything is a fantasy, and when she tries to explain to him that people within TV are real and some are not, he has a very difficult time understanding that. But this is a very interesting book. The bits of room do tend to get a little bit repetitive, but when they come out and you deal with how they're trying to assimilate back in, that's really interesting. Obviously the bit where they are freed is very tense, and if you've ever watched any documentaries or read any books of true life stories of this, then you'll know that kind of claustrophobia and then that fear of escaping from the room and the repercussions of that. So it's very, very interesting. If you're interested, like I've just said, in any of those true stories, then I would give this a read because this is a kind of novelistic version, but it does have very similar threads and themes. And it gives you that atmosphere, that claustrophobia that I was talking about in this book. But I actually thoroughly enjoyed this, and I believe I gave this 4 stars. Because I haven't had a chance to check my Goodreads, and they've all blurred into one this month, I haven't right now in my head remembered what I gave them, but I will put up here my star rating of what I did end up giving them if I've told you wrong. So I believe this was 4 stars, but somewhere over here I'll give you the actual definitive star rating I gave it. But I really, really enjoyed it, and I would recommend people read it. I was put off reading this for a long time when it became very popular because I believed it was going to be like one of those cheesy bestsellers that I don't end up liking. Examples being Gone Girl and The Girl on the Train and things like that people love. When someone hypes up a book to me, I tend to not like writing style and the pace kind of books, but this one was an interesting change, and I mulled over these characters long after I'd finished the book, and it gave me a lot of food for thought, this kind of book. It is longer than I expected it to be, but the development was very good. I mean, arguably maybe 100 pages here and there could have been taken out of this book and you wouldn't really have missed an awful lot, but overall I think it does what it says on the tin. What she aimed to achieve out of this, she certainly did, and I will be looking out for other works by this author. And then the next one I read was Life of Pi by Jan Martel. Now this one I had a really weird reaction to because the first half of this book deals with the main character. So basically the author gives you a prequel at the beginning saying how he got the inspiration for this book by travelling to India, meeting a man who said, you need to speak to my godson or my nephew, I'm not entirely sure what their relationship was. but he has an amazing story that you should hear. So he stays in India and finds out the story. And then the author at the beginning is kind of telling us back this story from interviews he has with the main character, who is called Pi. He's called Piscine, so like the French for a swimming pool, but he likes to be called Pi, and that's spoken about in the first half of the book. So it's all about his experiences in India, and it's all about he grew up in a zoo in India, and about his family dynamics and all kinds of things, and I was enchanted by that half of the story. It kind of interludes with the author. When there's a section that's in italics, it's the author having kind of memories or perceptions of meeting Pi in India and how he feels about that. And then, not in India, sorry, the author meets him in Canada, because when he meets the guy in India, he tells him he lives in Canada now. Sorry if that's really confusing, yes. So the bit when the author's italicising it is when he's talking and interviewing him in Canada. The other bits in the first half are him reminiscing on his Indian childhood, just to clarify. Then the second half deals with, obviously, no spoilers here, that the ship he's travelling on to go to Canada with his family sinks, and he ends up being on a lifeboat with all these animals. Now that bit was the longest bit of the book, and that was the most tedious bit, because it went into a lot of detail about the survival on a lifeboat, which, for a true story, it was very accurate to probably how somebody survived in a lifeboat in those circumstances, but as a reader it becomes very boring and tedious very fast. Learning about how to assemble a lifeboat, learning how to turn seawater into drinkable water, and to ration out food was not the most interesting. And then spoilers, so if you don't want to know, but if you have watched the film, read the book, then carry on, you'll know what I'm going to talk about, but just skip ahead now if you don't want any spoilers. Basically, the third bit is when we find out that the animals were symbolic of the survivors, of the little cook boy, the chef, and his mother, and how all the animals and all the cruelty that happened, he covered it up with images of animals because it was very traumatic for him. Now that bit also, I wanted to really invest in that because I really liked the film, but that bit also was a little bit sloppily written at the end, so the two last thirds of the book really changed my perception of the first bit. Now the first bit I would have liked an entire story on a character reminiscing on his experiences. Obviously the last two bits we don't get the author's voice in the same way, we get a reconstruction of what he would have said, and in the first half we know that he survives, he goes and lives in Canada and he has a great time because the author's interviewing him in Canada after the event. But the last two thirds just lacked the beauty and the lyrical achievements and the interest and the intrigue that I gained in the first third. I thought this was beautifully written in the first third, and the last two bits I lost that momentum and I then found it a frustrating read. So overall I think I gave this maybe 3.5, I think, because I couldn't give it a full 4 because the last two thirds ruined that first solid third. But the first solid third let me know that Yann Martel is an exceptional story writer. He writes beautifully, and I will be checking out other works of his, and hopefully they can deliver what the first third of the book had promised me that Yann Martel can deliver. So there was that one. And then the last one that I read this month, which I've literally just finished last night, was Outliers, The Story of Success by Malcolm Gladwell. Now this was a very interesting one. I've literally just put a review up, so I do know that I gave this 3.5/3.8. I was going to give it 4 stars when I first started reading it because it presented a very interesting thesis almost, but the best way to describe this is like reading an undergraduate dissertation piece, because his ideas are very interesting, slightly ambitious I believe, but this was written in 2008, so it's nearly coming up to 10 years, and I think its age is starting to show a little bit. So it definitely presented alternative ways for me to look at success. What he believes, Malcolm Gladwell, is that we believe success is innate, and that people work really hard, they have great talent and something great happens. But what he's saying is that opportunities play a role in that. So examples in here is for hockey players and basketball players, it depends what month they're born. With pilots, it depends on the culture they come from, their beliefs and how assertive they can be, their cultural legacies he calls it. There's examples of geniuses and how they had an opportunity, or different cultures. For example, a lawyer who was Jewish at the right time in America could learn a skill that in 10 years, 20 years after he developed the skill, that became popular in the law field, and he had the knowledge to do well with that. With the geniuses, that they came from a middle class background, got better opportunities in education. So he gives loads of different alternative reasons, saying that basically people are given opportunities that we don't acknowledge. For example, like Bill Gates, he became obsessed with computers, and he had the right amount of knowledge at the right time that computers became really big, and that's why he became the great computer legend that he is known for. So I did agree with some elements of that. Yes, success is not just hard work and a great talent. What he's saying here is that a lot of people that become talents in their respective fields, their parents have pushed a lot of energy into perfecting that skill, and so he's presenting the idea that it's an opportune and equal playing field. It's just the kids that are given the extra push, the extra homework, the extra time to practice their skill are the ones that will become famous, not the ones that are the cleverest or the most sporty, for example. And I like that idea. However, when I finish this book, I'm not resolutely convinced of his overall argument. So he brings in a lot of different things. Examples like the Beatles, Bill Gates, geniuses, underprivileged schools in New York, lawyers, loads of, an exceptional amount. I can't even remember every single one of them. And they don't all resolutely click into his argument for me. Some of them I would read sentences and go, it's a little bit ambitious, that's a little bit of a problematic statement. And a lot of this reads more like a conversational, amateuristic tone of a dissertation undergraduate who's not fully convinced of their argument, and therefore when I finished it I couldn't be fully confident of his overall argument. I think he presents some really interesting ways to look at success in alternative ways than we do, and I agree with him that the way we're looking at it is probably not the most efficient and effective way to look at how success is dealt with. It's more of a simplistic and an opportunistic look at it. However, I wasn't fully convinced with this, but what it made me think is, now that it's almost 10 years old and this was one of his earlier pieces, that this might have just shown a little bit of underconfidence on his part, and in turn he's perfecting his skills of how to articulate what he wants to say. He presented some fascinating things in here which I was mulling on for a long time, made me think about different things, and this book is the first book in a very long time that's engaged me in an academic way, considering it isn't an academic book. It made me start thinking about his arguments and dissecting them and really getting that side of my brain engaged again since I graduated, so that was fascinating. And he has some really great points in here. However, overall, as a finished unit, it didn't give me that satisfactory feeling of being convinced of his argument. So that's why I couldn't give it 4 stars. But if you're interested in psychology but you don't want academic stuffy texts, you don't want something too intense to read, you want it easily readable, dissectable, all of his points are quite precise and clean, really. I'll just show you. So he's got his introduction, his part 1 there, his part 2, and everything's subsected into what he wants to talk about, so it's very succinctly done. Then I recommend this for you to kind of read it and get engaged in the psychology world and how psychologists try to communicate how they feel about theories, because obviously psychology is a more abstract field than others in terms of articulating your arguments. I would go to him because Gladwell seems to be able to explain things that are very difficult in a way that the general public can access. However, I just didn't feel like this was the most convincing of documents for this particular argument. However, it has made me want to go and read his other works and his most recent works and see where his progression lies, whether this is him sincerely or whether his newer works show that he has progressed in terms of how he states his arguments and his evidence. So it was a fascinating read and did want to give it 4 stars. However, because I'm not convinced of it, it can't get such a high rating from me. So that is it. That's all the books I read in October. I will be bringing you my November TBR very soon, and any book hauls that I might be producing this month. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.